Hello, and welcome to another episode of Bridging the GAAP, a podcast of the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. I am Joel Black. I'm chair of the GASB. And in this episode, our host, Matt Broder, Vice President of Communications for the Financial Accounting Foundation, will be talking to yours truly about what the GASB has going on for the rest of 2025. So let's get into that conversation.
Joel, welcome, and hope you've had a great summer.
Yeah, same to you, Matt.
Thank you very much.
We've had a good one.
Thank you very much. We're going to be talking about what the rest of the year looks like for the GASB on today's episode. I know you've accomplished a lot already in 2025. We've talked about some of the things that you've accomplished on this podcast, but there are a number of things coming up before the end of the year that I know are going to be occupying your time and the board's time. So what does the rest of the year look like from this perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I appreciate you asking and the opportunity to talk about what we have going on. While our agenda is smaller, we have fewer projects on the technical plan. The things we're working on are important, and we continue to move them forward. So when I look out for the rest of 2025, I think what our stakeholders can expect really are three main things. One is our project on subsequent events is scheduled to come to a conclusion, so a final statement should be issued on that by the end of the year. Additionally, we are going to have a 2026 update to our implementation guide. We just had one we released in 2025. We do expect to have one for 2026. So by the end of 2025, maybe really early 26, expect an exposure draft of that update for implementation guidance. And finally, I think our user stakeholders can expect to be kind of interacting with us on some research related to our pension and OPEB concept statement 7 note disclosure pre-agenda research project that we just put on the agenda this summer.
Fantastic. I want to go to the subsequent events item that you mentioned, because we did talk about that on the podcast in a previous episode. Can you just remind our listeners what the subsequent events project is? And what are maybe some of the differences in the final document that stakeholders can expect to see when it's published?
Sure. This project really is it's about those things that happen after year end, but before the financial statements are available to be issued, that are of such a significance that it's important for users to know that they happened, even though they're not necessarily reflected in the financial report or financial results and the statements themselves through a note disclosure. And we entered this project because our research found that while we expected or thought that the subsequent events, as we described them, were getting users what they needed, what we found was a lot of misinterpretation of the guidance, resulting in a number of note disclosures we thought should be disclosed not being disclosed. So like a 30% error rate or omission rate. So what we tried to achieve in the project isn't to necessarily change what we always expected subsequent events to be, but better describe what those are so that we get the results we always hoped for.
Right.
And so in doing that in the proposal, I think the biggest change really was for those non-recognized subsequent events that are disclosed to explicitly say, hey, these four things, if you have them subsequent to year end and their material, they are subsequent events, and then have a fifth category of anything else that's really essential for users to know about what happened, kind of a more catch-all kind of description. That's what we proposed in the exposure draft. As we got feedback, we do listen, right, and we make adjustments. What we heard was one of those four explicit ones, the enactment of a tax rate, really probably wasn't going to achieve what we wanted it to, so we took it out. So we're left with only three explicit events. And even one of those, some of what we got back, we're going to tweak some wording, but overall it's going to stay as it was.
Right. And so what you're trying to do is just drive that 30% omission rate down to a much lower level.
Trying to get it more to hopefully getting all the subsequent events we expect to disclose. Surely you're going to always have some that are missed because there's judgment involved. But
yep. And when will those changes take effect? What would the effective date be for that guidance?
So that decision isn't totally finalized, but I believe as of this point, it would be fiscal years beginning after June 15th, 2026, which would mean in 2027 government financial reports, they would be using the new subsequent event guidance.
Right. Got it. You also mentioned the implementation guidance update. That document, what is that going to be looking at?
That one is going to be our implementation guide. Sometimes can span different things that we're getting questions about that we want to issue Q&As to help people, implement the guidance. This one specifically is going to be focused only on Statement 103, which was our financial reporting model. And even probably more specific than that, I believe it will only be about subsidies. This idea of subsidies and what is a subsidy and how enterprise funds of government should report those subsidies is new in Statement 103. Statement 103 will be effective for 2026. We're still getting a number of questions about, hey, I have this situation. Is it a subsidy? And so we're going to try to answer some of those through a series of Q&As really specific to subsidies. So that's what the focus of that implementation guide update will be.
Great. Turning now maybe to the research agenda for the GASB. I know that the staff is looking at pensions and other post-employment benefits. What exactly are you looking at there, and what might be next steps in that effort?
Sure. This, Matt, really stems from a longer-term look at note disclosures. And when we did some research on note disclosures broadly many years ago at this point, we found a lot of people said the note disclosures were too long, too much in there, but yet there were no obvious candidates for removal. And so what we did really to start was start a conceptual framework project and issued Concept Statement 7 back in June of 2022, which really described for the board itself, hey, what characteristics should an item of information have for us to be able to require it to be a note disclosure? And we said it should be essential in Concept Statement 7. Really, we always said it should be essential, but Concept 7 described essentiality better by saying a breadth or depth of users should use it in a meaningful way to impact their decision-making or accountability assessments. So any disclosure that we've contemplated or included in a project since June of 2022, we go out to users, we talk to them, hey, would you use this item of information? If so, how? Team brings that information back to the board. Board uses its judgment and says, does that rise to the level of essentiality for us to require it to be a note disclosure? So we've done that, we're using it, but that doesn't help with the volume of note disclosures that come from all the past disclosure requirements. And so we've made a commitment that over time, we would evaluate all existing note disclosure requirements through this lens of Concept Statement 7 and this description of essentiality. And so one of the biggest note disclosures we have are the pension and OPEB note disclosures. And so this pre-agenda research project is about going out and talking to users about all the existing pension and OPEB note disclosures and how they use them. It'll probably take us the next 15 months or so. Right. The research will start later this year, but by the time we finish it all, go through all the interviews, all the outreach we're going to do, summarize that information for the board, it'll probably be late 26. But from that, the board will determine, hey, do we have a standard setting project that might remove some of these note disclosures that don't seem to rise to the level of essentiality, or maybe it seems like they all are essential and being used and we won't have a standard setting project. But that research is really kicking off here in 25.
Right. And I guess what I'm taking from this is more to come, and there will be many opportunities for stakeholders to be involved in engaging with you and with staff on this topic.
Absolutely. 25 is really just us going out and talking to users. So any user that is listening to the podcast and is interested in being part of that research, be sure to call us. But certainly we're going to be doing outreach to try to get it in front of them, and hopefully they'll participate.
Terrific. So this particular episode of the podcast is pretty special. You were our first guest in the first episode, which, if you can believe it, was now 2 years ago.
It's crazy, man.
It's been 2 years. We talked at that time about the Financial Data Transparency Act, which was a terrific and very timely topic. But here we are 2 years later. The podcast this is episode 13. We've had 4,000 downloads of the episodes collectively. Just wondering how you sort of feel about that, and also how you think the podcast maybe fits into your overall stakeholder outreach and engagement strategy.
Sure. Certainly, Matt, the podcast was never intended to replace any outreach, and it hasn't. We continue to do the things we've always done. We're just trying to find new ways because, the lifeblood of standard setting is information. It's information input from our stakeholders about the things we're thinking about ways we could do better, about things we should be working on but maybe aren't. So input information is important, is vital, really, to us. And the podcast is really, I think, just another avenue. And I hear a lot of people really like the podcast. When I go out and I'm at conferences or talking to stakeholders, a number of them will often comment on, hey, I love the podcast. Sometimes it's people we were probably reaching already, but sometimes it's people that probably weren't interacting with us as much and didn't hear as routinely from us about the things we're working on, and now they are. So I think that it's been, to me, a successful addition to our outreach to be sure we're getting people participating in the process and understanding what we're working on, and when the standard come out, getting some education about how to implement it. All that's part of our mission to make sure that the standards are high quality and used well.
That's terrific. And just to finish this off with maybe a little bit of a crystal ball exercise, 2026 will be here before we know it. I'm wondering what we might be talking about on the podcast in the months and next year ahead.
Sure. 26, we're the things we are working on will continue to progress. So I'm sure we will have podcast episodes on. We've got actually 4 planned documents to come out for comments. 2 being exposure drafts of proposed statements. One of those being our severe financial stress probable dissolution project, or some talk about it as going concern. The second one being our infrastructure asset project. So I would expect exposure drafts and podcast episodes on those in 26, as well as 2 kind of non-standard setting projects, but they're going to have what we'll call discussion memorandums, just information about how we're thinking about certain things like research that are out for public comment to get input on. One of those is our GAAP structure project, and the other is the voluntary digital financial reporting project that somewhat is related to the Financial Data Transparency Act. That was that first episode of the podcast we did. So stay tuned, subscribe, and I'm sure you'll be hearing about all 4 of those things in upcoming episodes.
That's great. Well, Joel, we really appreciate your championing of the podcast as part of the mix for your stakeholder outreach. And I know we look forward to having you back on the podcast again in the future. So
anytime.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you all so much for tuning in with us to this episode of Bridging the GAAP. We hope you'll join us again, and please be sure to visit gasb.org/podcast to subscribe and to stay updated on future episodes. You can also follow the GASB on LinkedIn, Facebook, and X, previously Twitter. Bridging the GAAP is a production of the Financial Accounting Foundation, produced by myself, Eileen Foley, and brought to audiovisual life by Patrick Dorsman. So until next time, keep balancing those books, crunching those numbers, and embracing the art of financial reporting.